Good morning, everybody. My name's Mike Cherrett, and I'm the Director of Operations at the Climate-KIC. For those of you who've not heard of the Climate-KIC, we're Europe's largest open innovation network. So we're a collection of 250 partners working in 13 countries across Europe. And we aim to break down the barriers between the private sector, the public sector, and the knowledge sector, and work with real cities and real geographic regions to do ambitious, bold things. So this morning, I'm very pleased to be announcing or unveiling one of those bold things, which has been a very fruitful partnership between our network and DEC and your network to create the Global Calculator. I'm not going to say too much about the Global Calculator because I think a film is going to come on in a few minutes to say that, and you can make your own mind up about how you want to use it and what it means. We're very privileged this morning to have a selection of speakers in the panel. And I'll introduce those now. We have Ed Davey, the Secretary of State at DEC. We have Amber Rudd, the Minister for Climate Change. We have Sir Mark Walport, the UK's Chief Government Scientific Advisor. Sorry, Mark. We have Simon Harrison, who's the Manager for Global Strategy Development. And we have Maria van der Hoeven, who's the DG at the International Energy Agency. And we'll be joined by a Chinese partner from the Chinese Centre for Climate Strategy by video. So you haven't come all this way on a bleak January morning to listen to me, so I shall, without further ado, introduce the video, which will tell you what the Global Calculator is about, and after that the Secretary of State will come up to the podium and make some introductory remarks.
Our world is changing. We are already seeing the effects of climate change on ecosystems and on economies. The world's governments have agreed to limit average temperature rises to below 2 degrees Celsius, which means that emissions will need to halve by 2050. But by 2050, the global population could grow from 7 to 10 billion, and the economy could triple. This could increase the world's energy demand by 70%. Is it possible to keep to our 2-degree target? Can those in developing countries aspire to the lifestyle enjoyed by richer countries today? And how much will it cost? To find out, experts from around the world have come together to build the Global Calculator, an open, free and interactive tool that anyone can use to explore our options to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. The results may surprise you. The calculator shows that it is possible for everyone to have good living standards in 2050 and tackle climate change. But for this to happen, we will need a green technology revolution to change the way we produce and consume energy. And it needs to start now. We need a radical move towards low-carbon electricity generation, while also doubling electricity supply. At the same time, huge strides will be needed in energy efficiency. We will need to protect and expand our forests as they act as an important store of carbon. This will reduce the amount of land we have available for farming, so to make sure everyone has enough to eat, we will need to increase crop yields by 40 to 60%. Businesses and governments are already using the tool to explore these opportunities for themselves.
The tool addresses a wide range of areas that are really quite critical to our business. And for us, it's very helpful to be able to look at impacts and balances between the drivers in the tools to think about how we face the future, but even more importantly, to work with our clients in helping them understand implications for their business in whichever countries they're operating.
I can simulate use this tool to check different sectors from the global angle and can compare with our China calculator and can get how much the percentage some important sectors and some emissions in the world.
The piloting we've done internally has attracted a lot of attention from colleagues all over the world who are interested to participate and contribute their expertise and see things from their perspective. So I'm optimistic that it will become a significant part of how we think. I'd very much encourage other people to use it as well.
Visit globalcalculator.org to try our interactive tool yourself. See if you can hit the 2-degree target and share your pathway on Twitter. The Global Calculator, informing the climate debate.
I bet you all want to get your hands on this calculator now, really, rather than listen to some speeches. But I wanted to start by thanking everyone who's been involved in this amazing development across the world, coming together to produce a tool which couldn't be more timely. Given the challenges we've got this year and the opportunities we've got this year in the run-up to Paris, I think this hopefully will focus people's minds, policymakers' minds around the world. And we very much need that to happen, and urgently. I think everyone here today shares a common understanding, I believe, and a common objective, the need to follow the climate change science, which has all the warnings that we're all so aware of. It's important, though, to remind ourselves that in the UK, the direct risks are only floods and extreme weather that will disrupt our services with impacts on property and health. But in other parts of the world, the climate change impacts some of which we're already seeing, are far more severe. Desertification, coastal inundation, sparking mass migrations of people. Huge food shortages, water shortages, competition for land and resources that could spark conflict and state failure. Potentially a very dangerous and brutal world. And we in the UK should be very concerned about that, not just because of our moral responsibility to the global family, but because we have a direct self-interest. We are an open trading nation. Our prosperity is inextricably linked to the rest of the world. So more extreme climate change impacts in the rest of the world will hit our prosperity and our very way of life. So I believe the objective that the scientists have given us to limit climate change to the 2 degrees is something that has to be fundamental, right at the heart of what we do here in the UK, both domestically and working with other countries. So I hope that this calculator will help on the way to Paris. Paris isn't the world's last hope, but it's critical. And even if we get the deal that I believe we can get in Paris, it won't be the end of the story. But failure to seize the opportunity that Paris gives us will simply mean that the costs will become even greater. Delay means higher costs and greater dangers. So everything that we can do between now and Paris, I think, is essential. And this calculator helps. I hope it will help energise and improve the debate. I think it will help us reconcile some of the concerns that people have in this country and around the world, that somehow there's this tension between economic development and tackling climate change. I think if we can show that you can do both, I think it will enable us to keep up the action, press for more, and get more people to embrace the solutions. And we in the UK have set ourselves an ambitious target through the Climate Change Act to reduce emissions by 80% by 2050. We've got detailed plans about that. Our 2011 strategy with a carbon plan looks at the options, and feeding into that, of course, was the 2050 calculator, the UK 2050 calculator. And for those who aren't aware of it, it's a simple, transparent, open, online tool to help people look at the different scenarios from the UK perspective. What will it mean to energy, land use, and many other things here in the UK? And it's been particularly helpful in helping us understand how we need to meet our climate change goals here. And it's helped people outside government, it's helped NGOs like Friends of the Earth, it's helped National Grid, it's helped other people in the economy begin to think, what are the implications of the journey that we're on climate change to their businesses, their organisations. So it's been successful here. The good news, and I'm really proud of this, I'm really proud that my department's led this, it's also impacted the thinking of many other countries around the world. My department's worked with many of the countries, some who've adopted this approach now as central to their thinking. Some we've helped adopt, some have just taken it on board themselves and invested. So we've now around 20 governments who have developed or are developing their own country-level calculator. I'll point to the slide. I'm supposed to point to those flags, but I think it's fairly obvious. Anyway. And we're going to hear from China shortly. They've been using their calculator to think through, both through their 5-year plans, but also their other economic and energy strategies. And they've used it to train their officials on thinking through the different trade-offs and challenges. So I think that influence that the UK calculators had through working with other countries so they can develop theirs has already been very, very significant. I believe it's probably the best value for money investment the UK's made in climate change. It's that significant. I really think the colleagues in DEC who developed it have had an influence way beyond these shores. But the problem with the country level calculators was we couldn't really get a feel for how it all adds up. And what we wanted to do in setting on this pathway to a global calculator was try to get a real high-level picture of the sorts of trade-offs that the world needs to make and the sorts of options and possibilities that are out there if we take the right choice as a global family. And so DEC, with joint funding with Climate-KIC, has involved a whole range of global partners to build this global vision. And it's a new, they tell me it's simple, but I'm sure it's not simple really. Maybe it's simple to use, but it's an open online tool, the global calculator. As we saw in the videos, you can get an appreciation for looking at that screen. You're going to be able to explore the full range of scenarios for the world's energy, land and food systems to 2050. And you can see the resulting global emissions and climate change impacts then out to the end of the century. The beauty of this is it's sort of your tool, you're in charge. You can go away and play and look at the different alternatives. And you can ask questions. Can we all eat as much meat as the average European? Do we all need a solar panel on our roof? Can we still travel by car? Will it be possible, as we saw in the video, the challenge of feeding a population of 10 billion in 2050 and ensuring they can have a good quality of life? When you start interrogating the model, the good news is the answer to most of those questions is yes. We can see a world of 10 billion people that's sustainable, that's prosperous, and in which we tackle climate change. You're going to hear shortly how this actually works, because you wouldn't want me to tell you. But here's an example of a 2-degree pathway, and you can see the emissions falling over time. Cumulative emissions by 2010 are below the orange 2-degree line. You can see that thermometer and the 2-degree line there. The temperature changes around the 2 degrees. And then we can see large improvements in global living standards. And you're going to be the cursor to show that, aren't you? There's an increase in global living standards. Now, no path to tackling climate change is going to be easy. I don't think anyone in the room imagines that. There's no quick fix, there's no silver bullet, there never has been. But if we are really ambitious on our deployment of low-carbon technology, of innovation in low-carbon fuels, and we think more intelligently about the way we use our land, we can achieve both these development and climate change goals. I think many of us have felt for a long time that there has been this false dilemma between green action and growth. And the report that came out in September last year, the new climate economy study, I think did a fantastic global job with, again, using economic thinkers from around the world to show that these two goals can be met together. We can use low carbon growth to drive investment, to provide more jobs, as well as getting the better health, the better business productivity, and improving quality of life for all. But you will, after this morning, be able to go and test the findings for yourself, create your own vision of the world to 2050. Again, I'd like to end by thanking everyone for this global effort. We've seen experts from 10 globally respected organisations who brought this about, from the USA, from China, from India and from Europe. And it was mentioned by Mike, one of these organisations was the Chinese Energy Research Institute. As we are hosting this event here, they're hosting a launch event right now in Beijing. And I feel almost like the Eurovision Song Contest, so I'm going to hand over and hear from my counterpart, Professor Junfeng, and over to you. I hope the video will come online. We don't need to vote.
各位专家，下午好！非常高兴，各位来参加今天的全球计算器的发布会。我是来自国家气候战略中心的李俊峰，很高兴和大家在这里见面。因为气候变化是全球面临的共同严峻挑战，关系到人类的可持续发展和我们子孙后代的福祉。中国作为一个发展中的大国，经济应对气候变化。 建设美丽的中国是实现可持续发展的内在要求，也是对全球生态环境建设的一个重大的一个贡献。目前，中国正在大力推进生态文明建设，积极开拓绿色低碳发展和可持续发展，努力完成2020年 GDP 的二氧化碳的强度要比2005年下降40%和45%的一个目标，并且希望我们到2030年的时候实现 碳排放峰值，达峰。现在我们已经完成了，到2014年年底，我们已经完成了30%的这么一个任务。我们希望到2020年能够超额完成40%到45%的这样一个目标。现在中国也在大力的发展清洁能源，我们的可再生能源的发电装机容量占世界的第1位，已经是占了世界的1/4左右。我们的人工造林的面积也是世界第1的，所以说中国在应对气候变化方面还是做了大量的工作。去年我们颁布了国家应对气候变化的行动纲要，并且呢也明确了新的任务和目标，尤其是去年的中美联合声明为2030年的一个目标规定了新的任务，包括2030年达峰和非化石能源比例要提高到20%这么一个目标。 所以说，我们在应对气候变化方面还是任重道远的。全球计算器这么一项工作是来自于全球的10几家顶尖的能源机构共同研发，经过100多次的专家认证，涵盖了能源、土地和气候系统。该系统将复杂的能源系统和气候影响以一种非常直观和简单的形式呈现出来，适用于所有关心能源发展和气候变化的人士。这一成果具有 极强的创新性。今天，190多个国家将在巴黎签署一份新的协议，各方将在联合国气候框架公约的基础上，特别是在共同担有区别责任的基础上，展开一系列的谈判。全球计算器将帮助我们深刻了解当前环境所存在的问题，也促使我们付出更多的努力。我们希望这一工具能够成为各国探讨 制定各种应对气候变化决策的一种决策工具和参考的平台。最后，我也感谢各位的再次感谢各位的光临，也希望各位在今后的工作和研究中充分借鉴全球计算器的成果，也非常欢迎各国与我们共同的开发新的技术软件。我们也希望更多的互动和交流。谢谢大家。
Thank you very much. I'm Amber Rudd, Parliamentary Under-Secretary of State for Energy and Climate Change. Great pleasure to be here. It's marvellous just to hear from Professor Junfeng about how the global calculator is already having a significant global reach into China. And I'm going to try to demonstrate how the calculator works and why it's so unique. Tom here from DEC, the magician's assistant, is from the global calculator team, and he'll highlight these features as I speak. Let's start with 3 reasons why the global calculator is unique. First, it's collaborative. To build the calculator, the development team, composed of 10 international groups, consulted with 150 organisations in the spheres of business, academia and governments from around the world. The full team can be seen on the slide here. We heard from the Secretary of State about the role and involvement of various countries and governments, but I think it's particularly significant too to hear about the role of other organisations. Second, it's open source. From today, the underlying data will be fully published. It's rare for their models and the data to be so public, but it's very important to us for getting the feedback on it and for building trust and confidence in the results. Third and finally, and I hope you'll agree when you get your hands on it, it is simple. For example, it models at a global level without taking into account country-level detail or burden sharing. And Tom has already pointed out to me kindly that it's even simple enough for MPs to use. So let me show you how it works. The user is in control, and for the moment, you're the Minister for Global Energy, and the tough choices are down to you. You get to make choices on 40 or so different levers, grouped into themes of lifestyle, technology and fuels, land and food, and demographics. By making choices, you decide what happens in the world's energy, land, and food systems up to 2050. Each lever relates to a type of action to reduce emissions from 1 to 4, representing the full range of what's possible. These 4 levels are based on the views of the 150 experts the team consulted when building the model. For each lever that you control, you can see a short explanation to get more details on your options. So level 1 represents a minimal effort to reduce emissions, or the highest emissions case. Level 2 represents an ambitious effort, and level 3 involves a very ambitious effort, and level 4 represents an extraordinarily ambitious effort to reduce emissions. And you can see the impact of that there. So let's look at an example. For the choice on nuclear power, you can choose anywhere between a complete phase-out of nuclear power to ramping it up at the fastest rate which is considered technically feasible. As well as exploring the choices you care about, you can explore the implications of your choices and reflect on your decisions. So starting with the overview page, you can see 3 things: energy, emissions, and warming. We have the energy supply and demand on the left, and in the middle we have global emissions to 2100 and the cumulative emissions in 2100. The aim is to keep cumulative emissions below the red line, which turns orange when you get to a 50% chance of 2 degrees. On the right we have the thermometer, which shows the global mean temperature which rises from the choices. If you want to explore implications for the global lifestyle, you can see impacts in the lifestyle tab. For example, let's look at travel. You can see how our choice of mode, seen here, affects the type of travel used and the impact on global emissions. If you change the technology and fuel levers, you can see the impacts in the technology and fuels tab at the top. And if you change the land and food levers, you can see impacts in the land and food tab. You can then see more detail on climate change impacts, particularly how a global mean temperature rise translates into warming impacts at a regional continental level. Finally, you can explore the cost implications from your overall pathway. Now, I hope you're all going to be itching to find out what this tool can tell us. I've given you the simple overview, and I'm particularly impressed by the way it looks so accessible even to MPs. But I'm going to hand you over to the scientist who'll give us a bit more detail, Sir Mark Walport.
Thank you very much indeed, Minister, and it's a pleasure to be here. Now, I've often said that the hard part of climate is the science, but the even harder part is the communication, and the hardest bit of all are the policy decisions that our elected politicians around the world are going to have to take. And for that reason, tools like this are incredibly important, because I think they sit in that middle space between the science at one end and the policymakers at the other. And it is the opportunity for us all to get involved and actually be able to manipulate these various levers. And I think that's a very powerful tool. And the fact that, in fact, the individual country calculators have taken off so extraordinarily, as the Secretary of State has said, shows the power of this as a tool, the fact that you can get it as an open tool in Mandarin, available in China, but also available to use for other country users around the world, I think is a testament to an extraordinary effort by the team in DEC and all of their partners that have achieved this. So I'm just going to give you one example, but I think the important thing to say is, and I often show slides and say this is an example of how not to show a slide. This is an engagement tool to use on your computer. I'm afraid, and I've already tested it, that from the back of the room it's quite difficult to see the individual boxes, which I think is a reason for us all to have a play at this at home. Each of these is an example scenario, and the eventual answer is going to be a mix and a match. But I think it's also important because there's an awful lot of discussion about decarbonising the energy supplies. We tend to focus on the supply side and not as much on the demand side. And of course the answer is that if we're going to solve the challenges that we face in relation to anthropogenic demand for energy and power, and let's not forget that it is actually the energy and the power that the UK pioneered in the Industrial Revolution that has changed our lives extraordinarily and has enabled so many people to actually live on the planet. But we now have to deal with the consequences of that. So you heard earlier about the challenge that by 2050 the global population could rise from 7 to 10 billion, that energy demand is going to increase as the global economy might triple in size, and that food demand is going to rise as well. But that doesn't alter the fact that we have to halve our greenhouse gas emissions globally by 2050 to meet the 2 degrees centigrade challenge. And if we don't, the likelihood is that we will see very dangerous climate change. And of course what we're seeing is climate disruption, as you've heard from the Secretary of State. So I'll just show you through one example how we can meet the climate targets and ensure that we have globally good living standards by 2050. But if we're going to do that, we need to transform both the technologies and the fuels that we use, and we need to make smarter use of our limited land resources. So we start on this screen, hang on, don't move it yet, with the business as usual. And you can see on the business as usual that our cumulative carbon dioxide emissions to 2100, which Tom is just pointing to at the moment, the red line is the target, and the bar is, you can see we've gone way above that. With the result that there's a little warning on the bottom right showing that we're going to miss the global temperature targets. And of course, in this scenario, you can see the emissions per year increasing to 2050. It's a dotted line after that because it doesn't take it further. But of course, if business carries on as usual, then you can see that by 2100, things are going to be very much worse. So that's the starting one. But we can alter our behaviour. And so the scenario that Tom is going to demonstrate is the distributed effort scenario. And you could see there very briefly, just show the menu again, that there's a whole string of different, there's a Friends of the Earth one, there's a Mott MacDonald one, which you saw a little bit before, the Vegan Society, one can guess what that one will be about. And so there are lots of options, and of course the opportunity is to create your own pathways, to share them. And they will all be some element of mix and match in these different areas. So the distributed effort scenario, which we're now on, where you can see the carbon emissions falling in the middle at the top, and you can see that we nail the target rather precisely in this scenario, gets to 2 degrees, but it leaves us with at least similar lifestyle choices as we have at the moment. And so in this one, the effort is focused on reducing emissions, and that requires development of new technologies, different sorts of fuels, different sorts of land use and food production. And the effort is balanced out against each of the lifestyle levers at the bottom. So we could, for example, in this scenario, own more appliances. And remember, this is global. So, for example, every urban household could own a washing machine by 2050, although they would be a much more efficient washing machine operating on decarbonised electricity. And you can see, and these are the different, these are the number of appliances in 2011 according to different parts of the world. And you can see that the number of appliances will go up in this model, but they will all be much more efficient as they are than they are at the moment. We also have enough land to ensure that everyone does have enough to eat in 2050. And indeed, we have, on average around the world, 2,180 calories per head today, and that could rise to 2,330 calories per head in 2050. But if we're going to do that, then we need action on technology and fuels. And firstly, we need to have much greater energy efficiency. And so one of the things which we must achieve is much more effective insulation of buildings. And Tom's going to show that now. Yeah, okay, so here we see the building insulation, and so this is the loss of heat from buildings falling by 2050. Goods manufacturers would need to reduce their energy demand for materials production up to 25%. So manufacturing needs to become more efficient. It needs to use more smart product design. It needs, obviously, to look at other issues of sustainability and resource shortage as well. For transport, for example, our cars should be around 50% more efficient. And of course, it will be obvious to people in this room that we need to power our technology as far as possible from decarbonised electricity. So in this scenario, up to 35% of our cars should be either electric or hydrogen by 2050. And Tom is going to show now, on the left you can see that in this scenario the number of cars on the road does in fact increase. Easier for me to look at it on this screen because I can see there. And you can see that, as I say, the number of cars is going up, the efficiency of the cars on the road in the middle is improving. And so, again, you can play around and see how you modify transport. But of course, all of this means that the global supply of electricity will need to almost double from 2011 by 2050. And Tom is now showing, please, that's it, the sources of electricity supply. And you can see that that yellow bar, part of it has increased very dramatically. And so in this scenario, there's much more energy from renewable wind, from solar, from marine sources. Show us the nuclear bar on this particular one, Tom. That shows that there's the orange one. It's the orange one, sorry, yes, the orange bar. And again, you can manipulate all of these figures. But we are going to have to decarbonise our electricity, and so the emissions per unit of electricity globally will fall by at least 90% by 2050 in this particular scenario. And there you can see the carbon intensity of our electricity generation falling. And of course, none of this will happen without a great deal of investment in technology, and storage is going to be extremely important as well as supply. But the bottom line is that substitution away from fossil fuels is absolutely critical, and fossil fuel use has got to fall from 82% of our primary energy supply today to around 40% by 2050. And that means that if you think about the reserves of fossil fuel that we know about, that we need to keep about 35 to 50% of our current oil reserves, 50% of our gas reserves, and 80 to 85% of our current coal reserves in the ground by 2050. Now, as has already been implied, land use is going to be absolutely critical in this because we need the carbon sinks of forests, and of course it's land that we need to produce our food. So in this scenario, forest area would expand by between 5 and 15% by 2050, and show us the forest, which is appropriately green. And again, it's how we use the land to produce our food that's important. So again, to achieve the target of feeding the world effectively and using our land more efficiently, we need to increase the average number of cows per hectare from 0.6 of a cow, I'm not quite sure how you have 0.6 of a cow, to 1 by 2050. Crop yields need to go from 40% to 60% higher than in 2011, and of course that requires agri-technology, and all of these provide economic opportunities. We need to have multi-cropping to reduce the land required for crops by a further 10%, and we need to increase the efficiency of land use, and that means switching from beef to poultry, vegetables and grains. And just to give you an idea, that the area the size of a football pitch can be used to produce 250 kilograms of beef, 1,000 kilograms of poultry and 15,000 kilograms of fruit and vegetables. And that's what you're seeing in the yields from one football pitch during 1 year, the football pitch being a universal measure of area. Now, so not only can you fiddle around with the different ways of achieving the lifestyle mixes, but you can also look at the financial costs of this as well. So the global calculator estimates the total capital operating and fuel costs. It includes the costs for all technologies such as cars, appliances, power plants. And under business as usual, as of course our demand goes up, total energy system cost could more than double. And there you see the costs going up. There are quite wide confidence limits on these. And we have to be realistic. There are wide confidence limits on all of the measurements here. Looking at the future is always peering through a glass darkly. But the point here is that the trends are absolutely clear. And if we don't do something, indeed quite a lot, then there will be adverse effects on our climate, on humans, and on the other species that we share the planet with. So the cost of a decarbonised energy system could be only fractionally higher. It could even be cheaper, because, of course, if our appliances are more efficient, then we use less energy. And so the 2-degree centigrade example pathways range from, on one end, saving 2% of global GDP compared to business as usual, to being more expensive by 3% of global GDP. And Tom's illustrating some of those pathways. But of course, this doesn't include the costs of climate change itself and all of the economic adverse effects of the consequences of climate change around the planet. And as the Secretary of State said, these could be catastrophic in many parts of the world. But the truth is the costs are highly uncertain, and the uncertainty bands of the pathways overlap. But bringing down clean technology capital costs is critical to cutting the costs overall, and that offers economic opportunities around the development of the new technologies. We need research, we need development, we need demonstration, we need deployment of hybrid electric and hydrogen cars, electricity storage, which is an absolutely critical global scientific engineering challenge, carbon capture and storage, the power of heat pumps, onshore wind, solar, photovoltaics. And of course, as I've already pointed out, 2050 is by no means the end of the journey, and we need to move to around zero emissions by 2100. So this requires strong leadership from all of us, from businesses, from civil society, from the politicians we elect. And that is why I think this is such an important tool, and I really would like to add my congratulations to others, to the team in DEC, and to Tom in particular for having so deftly steered through the demonstration. And I think that this year is going to be very important. We need support for urgent actions to cut emissions through an ambitious global deal at Paris at the end of November and beginning of December this year. So that's a rather whistle-stop tour through just one of the scenarios, and the likely scenario, I think, is going to be a mixture of almost all of the ones that you've seen. And I'd now like to hand over to Simon Harrison, who is the Group Strategic Development Manager at Mott MacDonald, who's going to talk about how businesses can use the global calculator. So, Simon.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be here to share some thoughts on how business can use this tool and make its contribution to the climate debate. Mott MacDonald is a company, a consulting company whose interests span virtually the whole range of levers in the model, so health, education, buildings, transportation, climate resilience itself, environmental work, international development, power and water worldwide. And in fact, it's a great pleasure to us that I have colleagues as we speak participating with Professor Junfeng in the Chinese launch in Beijing. We found this a fascinating exercise to explore the global calculator. And one thing that perhaps hasn't been touched on so far is its power as a common platform for dialogue. We found that by bringing people together from all those different facets of our business that can influence the levers in the tool, we were able to bring out a whole host of new insights, because disciplines all talk different languages. They all have different lenses through which they view things. And our power supply experts have one way of looking at the world, our buildings experts another, our agricultural and development aid experts yet another, and so on. And the language they use is not the same, and they don't see the same answers. You put them into one place with one platform, which is what this tool does, and all of a sudden, all that misunderstanding goes away. And within half an hour or so, everyone is able to focus with a common set of data, with a common language around a single platform, and to really understand what makes a difference and what doesn't. And to understand the cost impacts of that as well. So we developed our own pathway for the launch, and that was a fascinating process. Our focus was on technology and how one could focus on using technological advance towards low carbon technologies and minimizing energy consumption. But in looking at that, there were a few surprises for us, and they were around diet and land use, which have huge impacts, especially the effect of reducing the consumption of red meat, as Sir Mark has already alluded to. The potential of low carbon technologies in electricity generation was very high, but equally, and at rather lower cost, the opportunity in demand side reduction and energy efficiency is absolutely massive. And needs to be an area of stronger focus. So for us, those provided us with real insights for our own organisation. It really facilitated some high quality internal dialogue, and will continue to do so. And most importantly, it will help us help our customers, who are private sector and government organisations around the world. And we're already seeing opportunities in the dialogue we're having at the moment with our clients to help them think their way through some of this from their own corporate or national perspectives. It allows us also to anticipate and maybe sometimes assist where multilateral finance providers are going, where international aid agencies are going, so we can align our own business to be better able to support them. Businesses, I think, almost universally really, see alignment of themselves with the achievement of climate goals as a key part of their own long-term sustainability. Some of that might eventually manifest itself as regulatory burden, but by engaging in that debate, we are much better placed to influence winning outcomes, both for the climate and for the opportunities that creates for business around innovation, around new technology, around new types of service to help address this challenge. The calculator really does help us understand that and inform our response. The fact it's open source, it's impartial, unbiased, everybody can see the results, draw their own conclusions, allows people to come together, and that's so important in building partnerships in business. The timeframes are interesting as well, and in the business we're in, which is predominantly infrastructure, the timeframes are very long, and the types of projects that we plan, design, build are ones that have sometimes decades in the gestation. Examples in the UK might include high-speed railways, nuclear power stations, even a European supergrid. These things take a very long time to do, and so to understand their impacts is very important. We were very pleased when we looked at our own pathway and compared that with the recent report from UCL on the need to leave a lot of fossil fuels in the ground if we sustain a 2-degree rise. It was very interesting to see our pathway had managed to achieve that, and that in itself was a source of further debate and insights and dialogue. One of the things that we're talking to some of our clients about in the early stage is what you might call the nexus around food and energy and water, and we're certainly finding some of our government clients are very interested in that and in finding their own pathways towards climate change mitigation. If the tool is to be further developed, and we've begun to have this dialogue with the team, one aspect that possibly needs a little further work is in fact around water, because there isn't a water resource constraint in the tool at the moment, which we feel is potentially significant. In terms of our work for investors, most of the money that will be invested in this in new innovation in infrastructure projects and so on will come out of the private sector in one way or another, it's we're finding very helpful to banks and so on to begin to see some of the strategic implications of the investment decisions that they're making now. So overall, it's been very helpful to us in terms of our thinking and in terms of how we can talk to our customers, and I would commend that everybody looks at this and begins to develop a common platform for dialogue, because without that type of dialogue we won't make the interdisciplinary decisions that we need to mitigate the impacts of climate change. Thank you. I'd now like to introduce Maria van der Hoeven, who's the Executive Director of the International Energy Agency.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to join you today for the launch of the Global Calculator. I'm quite fortunate to be able to speak to audiences across the globe about energy, economy, and the environment. And what this tool represents is the chance for even more people to get involved in that discussion. Because, well, it has been mentioned before, too often this discussion on climate and the economy is polarized, partisan, and ideological, when it should be driven by evidence, data, and analysis. And the Global Calculator is the kind of tool that can bring the facts to the masses and put this discussion back on solid ground. And being a former politician and MP, I can only underline what has been said previously by the Secretary and the Under-Secretary about the importance of communication and the role of the Global Calculator vis-à-vis MPs. Very important, I fully agree with you. And these days, this is even more important. With the sharp drop in oil prices, we hear voices saying that investments into renewables will falter, that nobody will buy hybrid or electric cars, or that climate negotiations are sure to fail. This is not only inaccurate, but it's also short-sighted. Climate change and economic growth require patience, vision, and a long-term perspective. Long-term. You can see where today's trends would potentially take us. The calculator highlights warnings in red when showing our 6DS scenario, indicating that this scenario has potentially disastrous consequences for our climate, our health, and our economies. So, to avoid this future, we need to make smart choices today. We need to take action to be on track with our 2DS scenario, to keep average global temperature increase limited to 2 degrees Celsius in a cost-effective way. It's a scenario with much smaller growth in energy supply and demand. But what kind of choices will it take to make this scenario a reality? Now, as an example, just an example, let's look at electricity supply, which currently contributes 40% of all energy-related greenhouse gas emissions. And under our 2DS scenario, this electricity supply is largely decarbonized, producing only 5% of global emissions. And this requires a sharp decline in coal use, while growth of natural gas electricity production slows and peaks into 2030, where natural gas begins to be viewed as a high carbon fuel. And in parallel, we need rapid development in carbon capture and storage, nuclear, and especially renewables. And by 2050, hydro, solar, and wind should make up 65% of capacity compared to just 23% today. And what should be most encouraging to all of us is that while the efforts needed for this transition are significant, they are also cost-effective. Investing in clean energy will pay off. And indeed, the investment to move to a clean energy system is immense. $44 trillion of additional costs. But this represents only a small portion of global GDP and is offset by over $115 trillion in fuel savings. Even with a 10% discount rate, it pays off in the long run. The major challenge to making progress today is financing. the high cost of capital for many low-carbon technologies makes up a major portion of their levelized energy costs. The IEA 2-degree scenario, 2DS, provides a benchmark for meeting climate goals, but of course there are many paths that we can follow. And the global calculator is helpful for highlighting what choices can be made to stick to those paths and the associated trade-offs. And what's critical now is how we use this tool, how we transform data and evidence into action. We do not know exactly how the energy system is going to evolve or how and when innovation will provide new solutions. But we can surely try to understand the impacts of various choices and use this understanding to guide our efforts. And that's how this global calculator can really make a difference. Thank you.
Hope you've all got a good idea of what the calculator is about. I think it's fantastic to see Chief Scientific Advisor and ministers who've got their hands dirty and played with this thing already. That's pretty unusual in my experience. And I stress you don't need a Tom to run this. You can do it yourself, okay? But I'm sure he's available for a small, reasonable fee. I'm going to segue now to the panel, the speakers coming up to have a short panel session where it's your opportunity to pose some questions to them in terms of going to the next step of using the calculator. So I'd like to invite the speakers up to take their seats. While they're doing that, just to give us an idea of where you all come from, how many of you see yourselves from the private sector or business? Hands up, please. Okay, that's quite a lot. How many from the public sector? Okay, how many from the third sector, NGOs? And I'm guessing the rest are academics. Yes? Or politicians? Or we've got one. Okay, so panelists, please come up to the stage, take your seats. It's been great to hear the speakers give their first-hand enthusiastic take on using the model. So we're a little shorter on time for the panel than we expected. So we've got a good 10 minutes, but that means I'll be quite brutal in filtering your questions. So we'll probably aim to take 2 questions for each panelist in no particular order. But please, no statements, no grandstanding. If you've got a question, you've got to do it in 3 sentences or more, and make sure it is a question, please. So we've got a couple of guys with mics who'll rove through the audience. So please, let's take 1 or 2 in one go. So there's 2 hands there immediately. Let's take those 2 questions.
My name's Dustin Benton. I'm here from Green Alliance. I was struck by the number of mentions of the need to keep fossil fuel in the ground throughout the presentations. I just wondered how this will influence policy.
Okay, I'm David Aaron Thomas, freelance consultant. Given that lifestyle is such an important issue for politicians, interesting why we don't have a lifestyle panel up on the overview page, because I thought that'd be quite an important thing to know what's happening as a result of the things you play around with.
Okay, so 2 questions, one on keeping fossil fuels in the ground and choices around that, and then one on how to link this better and prove it to, I guess, dashboard lifestyles. Who'd like to lead?
I will certainly say something about policy. I mean, I think that's the purpose of the tool, to demonstrate that we have to keep some of it in the ground. It doesn't come as something new to most politicians who are engaged in this. That's why we're investing in renewables. That's why we're trying to find alternatives. But we're also aware as policymakers that you can't just leap from one to the other. You need to have a low carbon alternative, which is why the government's trying to move ahead with shale. And we need to make sure that we continue to invest in not just renewables, but also other technologies that Sir Mark spoke about a bit in terms of carbon capture and storage and storage generally. So there's lots of different pieces within this path, but I'm not surprised that we have to keep some of the fossil fuels in the ground.
Well, and not some of them, a lot of them, and especially coal. So let's not beat around the bush. If coal wants to be in business, they have got to do something about their business. Clean coal technologies and CCS are just 2 examples. And about the policies, I think it's important to realize that the most important thing policy should do is to see to it you have a predictable investment climate. and developed markets. And this is not something that can be done overnight. You need some time to do that, but this predictability is very important for investors. It's very important to make the policy change into a reality.
But in a sense, I mean, it's not that the policy target is to keep a certain percentage of the fossil fuels underground. The policy target is actually to decarbonise our power sources. It is to use less of fossil fuels, and the consequence of that will be, of course, that a lot of it does stay underground.
But not forgetting, of course, carbon capture and storage. My firm's doing some work on that, but it's potentially that's a large opportunity, quite a difficult one, because it all looks terribly expensive unless you factor carbon prices properly. But certainly potentially a major contribution to make.
Maybe, so Mark, you could pick up on leading on the next question, which is how do we better link lifestyles? I know you see this very strongly as a communication tool, so how can we make this better to bridge to a dashboard on lifestyle choices?
Well, I mean, there pretty much is a dashboard on lifestyle choices. You're looking at it at the bottom. So people will develop new specific scenarios. I mean, there is a vegan option on there. That's obviously a lifestyle choice. But I mean, I think the important thing is to emphasize that we actually need to operate on both sides of the equation. And if we operate on one side of the equation alone, we're not likely to hit our targets. It is actually about modifying our behaviours. It is actually about lifestyle changes on a global change will need to happen, but we also need to decarbonise our power supplies.
And that's the whole point. If you don't take human behaviour into account, it will be very difficult to change something. I give you just one example. There's a New Zealand example where they wanted to have more energy efficient refrigerators. So they had a program, and at the end of the day, they discovered that the growth in energy demand did not go down, it went up. So they had to look into what had happened. Well, what had happened was quite simple. Everybody bought this new refrigerator with the subsidy that went with it, and took the old refrigerator, put it into the garage, and used it for cooling the beer. Human behaviour. So if you forget about human behaviour, well, you get surprised.
I think Tom wanted to just add on the lifestyle choice.
So the team really welcomes feedback on this tool. So if you have any specific comments, please get in touch. This is always going to be under development. We can always improve it. And we've tried to be as open and collaborative as possible over the last year and a half or so. So please get in touch. On globalcalculator.org, there's an email address you can get in touch with. So just get in touch and suggest all the improvements that we can make, and we'd be happy for that.
Appetite for some more questions? Certainly one over there by the mic and another one on the aisle here. So we'll take these two together.
So my name's Aled Jones. I work for an investment consulting firm called Mercer, and we work with large asset owners like pension schemes to kind of understand all sorts of things from mainstream financial issues to these kind of issues here. And I appreciate it's slightly outside the remit of this project, but has any consideration been given during the development of this to the impact on investors? So we all hold shares in companies in all these sectors in our pension schemes, for example, and there's going to be good and bad implications from the shift to a low-carbon economy. So has that angle been considered at all?
Okay. So we just take two questions at a time.
Thank you. Chris Rapley from University College London. It's a question really for the development team. I wondered if any thought had been put into showing the savings. It was mentioned earlier that what is not shown here are the damages if we don't take action. And in terms of getting the message across and encouraging people to take this seriously, just showing the costs is often not a good technique. So is there any attempt to include damages? I know it's difficult, but what's the thought on that?
Okay, great. I sense two linked questions there. So one on implications for finance, and one the positive side of the cost savings coin.
If I may just comment on investment. I talk to a lot of investors in this sector, and motivating and mobilising private sector investment is incredibly important to building our renewable future. And I know that one of the things they always want more than anything is certainty for the environment in which they're investing. And the best way we as politicians can help to provide that certainty is by showing our commitment. And this is part of that plan. And I would say that will move forward when we reach an agreement in Paris next year, so that the investors can see that the whole world is committed to this low-carbon environment, when the politicians are motivated to do so, and we're putting the money behind it, and civil society want us to deliver. And as part of what was been said about communication, I think this calculator will help to deliver that as part of the programme. But we're very aware that the best thing investors need, apart from their return, is the certainty of the environment.
follow up on emphasising the saving side rather than the cost side?
I'll just deal with the first point as well. So on investors, what we're trying to say with this tool is we have 4 pathways that we've produced which take the same lifestyle improvements as business as usual and then put the effort to decarbonisation into technology and fuels and land use. So what that shows is you can have the same number of cars on the road, it's just a certain proportion of those would have to be electric or hydrogen. So there's still going to be improvements in consumption and the need for investment. It's just going to be spending the money somewhere else, somewhere that's going to help us get to our climate target. So I think that's really important.
I suppose that's right. Just to add on that, it just, given that we're going to countries that are increasingly moving towards specific targets, this will help investors look at where the countries are likely to put that emphasis when they can see which area creates the most damage.
Some more questions?
Hello, Keith James from RAP. I was very interested in the work around manufacturing, and particularly in the report, what is mentioned about the opportunity for design. Linked to that is the idea that businesses, for their own growth purposes, need to sell more, generally speaking. So is there anything that we can do that will help businesses to adapt their business models to the challenges that we see in front of us, as well as designing products differently?
Yep.
Well, no, I would like to maybe to give an answer to a question that has not been put forward, but it
should be a politician.
But it is about changing design. What strikes me is the position of energy-intensive industries. They are the most important emitters of CO2, and so they are the ones who need to really deploy CCS in the future. At the same time, they have one other option. That's change the design of their process. But when you look into the kind of new building materials we need, for instance, the cement industry could be a real game changer there.
I mean, there's also some natural incentives in that direction. Since energy costs are a very important component of many manufacturing processes, the incentive is actually to reduce manufacturing costs. And so I think that there are, the right incentives are in place. And of course, we're seeing, and there are a lot of reports on the future of manufacturing. The Foresight office in the UK produced one recently. Germany has Industry 2.0. They're moving towards much more of a circular economy where you recycle products. And of course, the Internet of Things, which will add sort of new dimensions. It's a different discussion, really. But I think the incentives are in place for actually manufacturers to reduce their energy costs, and that's got to be done, at least in part, by better design.
I guess we get involved very heavily in design, although perhaps more in construction than manufacturing. Construction, though, is becoming more of a manufacturing business. And the work we do really says that elegant, innovative, technology-accepting design reduces the amount of materials. It's as simple as that. And you need less to produce more. And so there's inherently a linkage between carbon and cost.
And one last follow-up point. This tool allows you to actually explore that yourself as well. We actually have a lever which is called Design, Materials and Recycling, and what this allows you to do, for example, is test, supposing cars are made more lightweight, so people still own as many cars and drive as much, but the cars they drive are slightly smaller and use less steel, so there's slightly less output. And you can see what happens if you click that lever in this scenario and see the associated reductions in emissions. So
That's good. Yeah.
if you have a question, get in touch with the team. If you say, I don't understand how to explore this type of change globally, then get in touch, we can help you. But also the website has lots of methodological documents and how-to guides and how-to video as well.
Okay, sure. Probably time for another 2 questions. Now I come in thick and fast. Okay, we've done the 4 questions. There are 2 hands went up there first, and then the 2 down here we'll do in the second round.
Hi, my name's Ben Murphy. I work in a venture capital firm called IP Group. I think this tool's great. I think it's wonderful, actually. I'm interested, though, on the perspective of the policymakers in the IA, of if it provides sufficient information for the Paris negotiations, for different countries to understand how their individual responsibilities compare together, and if there's still a gap to fill there for information for different countries to look at how they collectively add up their commitments to the targets that are needed.
Yes, you're quite right, and that's the reason that we are going to use this global calculator, but at the same time we are going to continue our own analysis, and that they will be on country level and on fossil fuel and renewable and energy efficiency level. Bring all these kind of things together will be very helpful to find the right pathways.
We feel it's absolutely going to be a major contribution to helping individual countries, particularly ones who don't have the same expertise perhaps, develop their particular contributions.
The mic on?
Yep.
Yep. I'm Jeff Lai from the think tank Sustainability. My question was very similar to the last one, but actually asking how you feel this could be helpful to, in a practical sense, to individual businesses, given that we all understand that this transition requires massive investment and effort by the corporate community.
Well, I hope that some of the example that Tom was giving you here would help with that in terms of actually being able to drill down and look at some of the implications of changing the manufacturing tools. So that combined with, I hope, what we're going to be able to deliver as politicians internationally, which is a commitment in Paris next year, seems to provide the right framework and, I hope, information to be able to help businesses.
Well, and it's important to realise that this is also a kind of wake-up call. Stop being complacent, because all businesses have something to deliver. You can't just lie back and tell the others, oh, you're going to do it. No industry can do it, and no others can do it either. So we're all part of the whole game, and everything we do, everything businesses do, is part of the solutions or part of the problem.
And for me, what I found, in a way, if I may, just most interesting about this is that there isn't one solution. You can't say, oh, I know what I'll do if we just have much greater nuclear, or we change this entirely. It's a disappointing overall response because you need to change so many different parts of it.
And I think, you know, if you're in a business looking at horizon scanning, looking at where you should be taking your future, there's a lot of opportunities in the tool to see where the future is likely to be leading, or what the range of possibilities are for the type of business that you're in, and how you're going to need to innovate to align yourself to that trajectory, and that for me is a powerful thing. And you know, let's say you're somewhere in the automotive industry. Well, there's a lot of insight you can gain in here from where you're likely to be wanting to align yourself in the future.
Another couple there was a question down here-ish somewhere. There we have the lady with glasses there. And we'll do one more after this.
Hi, Ella Adlon from the Martin School at Oxford University. I was wondering if there was any opportunity to see any unforeseen consequences as a result of playing around with the model. And I know there was a mention that there wasn't any limitations built into it at the moment for things like water supply, and I wonder if that's the next iteration of the model, and whether anyone has come out with any interesting results from playing around with the pathways that are of more of a negative consequence than a positive one.
So one of the ways we'd like to deal with that is to get more example pathways into the tool. So if, well, I know there are existing models out there that do consider water, and they model water and energy as one, and give you scenarios that try and minimise water use. So what would be ideal is if we could engage with those organisations, then ask them to map that pathway into the tool and say that would be equivalent to these sorts of choices and outcomes. And then we can say this is a low water use pathway that gets us to 2 degrees. I think then people using the tool could reference that when they make their own and then learn something from that. So again, we welcome engagement from anyone who has something to offer. Unforeseen consequences, well, I think things like biodiversity and water aren't included. I think we just hold our hands up and say this can't do everything, and no model can. It's just a tool for trying to inform the debate. But again, you know, you can use this in conjunction with other bits of analysis and other reports and evidence, but you need to look at lots of different sources to really get a good, complete picture of what's possible and what could happen under different pathways.
I think there's another angle here, which is the one a lot of people don't think about when they are putting forward their particular perspective, which is cost. And you can easily solve this at incredibly high cost. And the art is finding pathways which are at sensible cost. And so it's a good way of getting a handle on some of that.
Okay, time for one more question. Oh, I think the gentleman in the grey suit was slightly first. Better be a great question to end on. No pressure.
Phil Williamson, Natural Environment Research Council and University of East Anglia. There's quite a sort of psychological difference between very ambitious and extremely ambitious, and on the whole, you're sort of avoiding the extremely ambitious. But I'm wondering whether just within the last 6 months or so, with the change of oil prices from $100 to less than that per barrel, whether or not some of the things that the division between very ambitious, which is okay, we should be able to do it, and extremely ambitious, which is now going to be actually rather more difficult. Whether any comments on that, because presumably the underlying models were based on the situation of 6 months ago.
Sounds like a good question. You got two hands shot up immediately.
Well, I think that we can agree that a football pitch is an objective measure of area. I'm not sure that there's an objective measure that distinguishes ambitious from very ambitious.
Well, just to add something, you know, this volatility in oil prices has always been there. 2008, $145 a barrel. 2009, less than $40 a barrel. 2011, up to 125 again, and now less than 50. So do not use this volatility of oil prices to build on your long-term policy. 3 things about the low oil prices: phase out fossil fuel subsidies, put a price on carbon, and decouple the long-term initiatives on climate change mitigation from this volatility of the oil prices. So in other words, use this opportunity.
I mean, I agree with that, but there's no question that investors and consumers, to some extent, do respond to short-term financial levers. I think we shouldn't pretend otherwise, actually.
That's true. But nevertheless,
I agree with you.
politicians shouldn't do that. Huh?
I agree with you.
What do you think?
Well, I agree with what's been said, but I would add that I think that most of this long-term investment is required, and with long-term investment, usually the volatility is factored in and is not going to be reactive to a sudden fall or rise in oil price.
I mean, go back to your point, Minister, about policy stability. I mean, that's the thing that's critical.
I think the last thing to say as well is when we built this tool, what we've tried to do is to encapsulate the full range of views. So what we did was say for the lever choice on nuclear was we got the global experts in nuclear power into a room and said, what are the 4 scenarios that are possible? And you can choose anywhere between those scenarios, but what's the full range of options? And the full range of options is what's limited by sort of the laws of physics and what's technically possible. That's unlikely to change with a change in oil prices. So we think we have the full range of options in the tool. And again, you know, if you think we haven't, get in touch and we can improve it.
Okay, I'll draw things to a close now then. I'm not sure what you guys thought when you set off early this morning to come and hear about the global calculator, but I hope you're going away enthused and excited and itching to have a play yourselves. We've heard that it's a communication tool in one level, be that at public diplomacy and country level. It's a collaborative tool for getting different disciplines to work together. I think Simon said within his company it's already breaking down barriers within his organisation. I suspect Sir Mark is itching to get his foresight guys to play with this, and I think we've already seen the impact at ministerial level as well. So don't concentrate on what it can't do. Think of what it gives you now to allow you to play in the same sandpit and do the same sums with all those people who challenge you every day. I think it has amazing utility to bring disciplines together, to work together and see and to debunk why they shouldn't be working closer together rather than hiding behind each other's sums. Sorry, that was a long sentence, wasn't it, really? But I think that's the real power of this tool. So give it a go. Play with it yourselves. I'd like to thank all the panellists. The fact that we've had 2 ministers here in what isn't a quiet time politically in the UK is a great sign of the importance that the DEC attaches to this. Again, thanks to Maria and Sir Mark, who are busy people as well, and thanks to Simon, and thanks to Mott MacDonald in general for helping with the event this morning. If you'd like to know a bit more about the Climate-KIC, I'm around a bit later, and we're doing a lot of exciting things beyond that. But thank you to all of you for spending your time to come and listen to the event this morning, and please get on and play with it, and get your kids to ditch Angry Birds and whatever, and have a go at this. I'll be trying that with my daughters this evening.